Related question about the last one will be the slope of the line parallel to the linear equation, which is 2x plus 3y is equal to 8 is. So we're basically trying to solve for the slope of our linear function, unlike the last video where we had to find a perpendicular line. So it is about the parallel line's slope. And I left the information that we had to know in order to approach this question, because it is the same kind of process in order to approach this question, even where we had to find a slope, except we had to apply this to our linear function, where it is about or related to the parallel side, not a perpendicular side. So to review what we did here, we know that the linear function, its basic formula will be y is equal to mx plus n. And if you think about its variables and what does its constant does or affects in the linear functions, firstly, we always need to think about what is y and x, because y is output of every function, x is input of every function. They are the thing that actually generates our linear function, or as well as other types of functions. And they are the variable, which basically depends on times they changes all the time. That's why we notate it as just x and y, which we call it as a variable. And thirdly, we need to think about what is the m, which is the most important thing when it comes to solving this question. M in this case was a slope of our function, and the slope means changing y over changing x. Changing y over changing x will be our formula for solving for the slope. But then, if we kind of think about this more specifically, we know that changing x over changing y is to solve for the difference between some points. So there were 2 points, x1 and y1 we noted as the a value, x2 and y2 we noted as the b value. And we're trying to solve for a difference between them by doing x2 minus x1 over at y2 minus y1. And as we can see, the order of those won't be a matter. And this is a way how to solve the m, which we call it as the slope of our function. Lastly, we need to think about what is n in our linear function. Well, the n in our linear function will be a constant, which means if you think about the definition of the constant, it is a number without any variables beside it. And the opposite word of the constant, it will be a coefficient. The coefficient, which we're going to talk about in later videos, about related to a quadratic function. The coefficient means it is exactly the same kind of concept with a constant and a number, except it is a number beside. It is a number beside variables, which means it can be either numbers beside y or x. And so, another most important thing when it comes to solving this question was the intercept, the types of our intercept. The first type of our intercept will be what is the x-intercept. Before you think about it, we need to think about the definition of our intercept. The intercept refers to describe that the point is on a specific axis. So there will be 2 cases, because for the axis there are 2 cases where it can be either x-axis or the y-axis. The first case will be the x-intercept, which means the specific point is on our x-axis. So we call it as the x-intercept. And the x-intercept will be when the x value, our input, exists, our output of a function, which we notated as y, or f of x dependent times will be equal to 0. The second thing will be our y-intercept, which means our point is on our y-axis. We call it y-intercept. And for this means when our x value, our input, our function is equal to 0, our output of a function, which will be y or f of x, will exist, and we notate it as the y because it is a variable. Now the second thing that we need to think about to approach this question is what are some types of our graphs of our linear function. And mostly when it comes to solving for the easy part of our SAT Math Level 2 functions, we talk about either quadratic or the linear function. If we convert a quadratic function into a graph on the coordinate plane, it will be a specific parabola that satisfies its equation. For the linear function, it will be a specific line, a straight line that satisfies its own equation. And there were two cases and two main things that they were going to ask us during the class or in the questions. The first one will be, what is the perpendicular line through our linear function? For the perpendicular line, also a parallel line, we always need to think about it in order to define the difference between them. We always have to think about it through the slope and the y-intercept. The perpendicular line means when slope of it is negative plus reciprocal. If you don't know what the reciprocal is, the definition of the reciprocal is let's say there is a specific denominator for fractions like x over y. The reciprocal of this will be y over x, which means the denominator and denominator's position will change. And then in order to solve for our perpendicular line, we need to add minus to that m, which we call it as the slope of our linear function. For our parallel line, unlike the perpendicular line, and where the perpendicular line had to have the same y-intercept, and the y-intercept will be a intersection. So, for the parallel line, the slope of our linear function should be always equivalent. But the only difference will be our y-intercept. Our y-intercept should always be different in order to make our parallel side. This is what we learned in the last video to approach this question. And using this information, we'll be able to approach our question. And our question is to solve the slope, how steep the function is, through the parallel line of our linear function. To do this, we're going to get it wrong. The parallel side's slope should always be the equivalent, which means at any times it should be, we can call it as the constant because it never changes. And the y-intercept should be different in order to make a parallel lines in our equation to satisfy what the question asked us to solve. So, if we keep solving this, our parallel line. So if you think about parallel line, it should also be a linear function because it says it is a parallel line to our linear function. Y is equal to 2 over 3x minus 8. And parallel side, it will also going to be y is equal to mx plus b. But should always have the different y-intercept, so we'll notate it as c. All we have to do in this case will be solve for our m value, but our m value in our parallel side, parallel line should always be same. So as we can see from our original function, its slope is 2 over 3. So our answer for this question will be 2 over 3. But if you want to make a full version of a function, all you have to do is write y is equal to slope, which is 2 over 3, x plus c, because we don't know the x value. We don't know its y-intercept. But the question is not to solve for our y-intercept. This question is to solve for our slope. So our slope in this case will be 2 over 3 according to a property that we talked about, according to the ways or things that we need to know in order to approach this question.